Welcome back to Adam's Scary Stories. We're the place where the line between folklore and fact disappears completely. The stories you're about to hear are not for the faint of heart. Before we begin, if you enjoy exploring the darkness with us, please take a moment to subscribe and hit that notification bell. It's the best way to ensure you never miss a journey into the unknown. Every subscription helps us dig deeper and bring more of these unsettling truths to light. Now, turn down the lights, settle in, and prepare to question everything you thought you knew. My name is Dr. Aris Thorne. I'm a meteorologist, but these days I feel more like a historian, a psychologist, and maybe just a little a madman. It all started with the rain that wouldn't end. Seattle is the city of rain. It's part of our identity. We live and breathe in the drizzle and the mist, and we wear it like a badge of honor. But the rain that began last October was different. It started on a typically gray morning. Clouds rolled in from the Pacific, draping the sky in a heavy, damp blanket. But when the rain began, it had a strange persistence. It wasn't a storm, not a downpour, just a steady, relentless drizzle that continued day and night. Weeks passed and the rain didn't stop. The city sank into a sodden, melancholic landscape. The streets glistened, not with cheer, but with a perpetual dampness that seeped into everything. For my colleagues at the National Weather Service, it was an anomalous pattern. An atmospheric river that had stalled over our region for reasons no one could explain. We ran the models, analyzed the data, but nothing could account for why the system refused to move. It felt unnatural. Then in mid-November, the strange reports began. At first, it was just noise on social media, vague anecdotal posts. One person tweeted about suddenly smelling the Great Seattle Fire of 1889, the acrid scent of burning timber, and panic. Another woman claimed she felt the gut-wrenching loss of seeing her house destroyed in the 1962 Columbus Day storm, even though she hadn't been born yet. We dismissed it as a citywide case of cabin fever, a collective seasonal affective disorder. The incessant rain could get to anyone. But then the reports grew more specific, more troubling. People started having dreams that weren't their own. A young tech worker in South Lake Union dreamt he was a desperate prospector in the 1890s, his heart a cocktail of hope and terror as he set off for the Klondike Gold Rush. An artist walking through Pioneer Square was suddenly overwhelmed by the profound, helpless sorrow of the Japanese-American internment in 1942. These weren't memories, they were feelings, raw, unfiltered emotions that ambushed people on the street. A collective malaise descended upon the city. The suicide hotline lit up and people retreated into their homes not just to escape the rain, but to escape the assault of phantom feelings that awaited them outside. I began to approach the phenomenon with scientific curiosity. I started collecting samples of the rainwater, theorizing that some environmental contaminant, a neurotoxin perhaps, was causing this mass psychological event. My lab at the University of Washington was state-of-the-art. I ran every test I could think of: chemical composition, pH levels, particulate matter. Everything came back normal. One night, staring into a microscope in frustration, I saw something I'd missed. There was a microorganism in the water, a type of bacterium, or perhaps archaea, that didn't match any known database. It had a crystalline, almost fractal structure, and it refracted light in a peculiar way. But the strangest part was its behavior. On a whim, I introduced a single human tear to the sample, donated by a lab assistant who was having an emotional day. The organism sprang to life. It migrated toward the tear, seeming to consume it. As it did, its crystalline structure pulsed with a faint bioluminescent glow, as if it were processing an energy source. A wild, impossible hypothesis sparked in my mind. What if this organism didn't feed on chemicals but on the hormones and neurotransmitters associated with emotion? What if it could absorb, store, and transmit feelings? To test this, I decided to collect rainwater from locations of intense historical emotion. I went to Pike Place Market, a place teeming with the joy and bustle of millions over a century. I went to the site of the Wami Club, the scene of a brutal massacre in 1983, a place saturated with unimaginable terror and violence. I even collected a sample from outside the Lake Washington home where Kurt Cobain died, a site intertwined with both brilliant creativity and profound anguish. The results were staggering. The organisms from each location exhibited different energy signatures under the microscope. The Pike Place sample had a warm, vibrant pulse. The Wami sample emitted a cold, aggressive thrum. The Cobain house sample was a complex, discordant flicker of light and shadow. My theory was solidifying. This organism, which I provisionally named Psychohydra memoriam, the water serpent of memory, was absorbing the city's emotional history. The soil of Seattle, its buildings, its very streets are saturated with generations of feeling: joy, grief, love, hate, fear, hope. Normally, these emotional residues fade, but this relentless rain was acting as a conductor. The Psychohydra was drawing these emotional remnants from the earth, carrying them into the water cycle, and then being lifted back into the clouds through evaporation. It was a closed loop, an emotional ecosystem, and when that rain fell upon the populace, the organism would enter their systems through skin, breath, and water, releasing its stored emotional data directly into their nervous systems. People weren't just getting wet, they were being drenched in the collective memory of Seattle. The explanation was insane, but it was the only one that fit all the evidence. Now I had to figure out where it came from and how to stop it. I dug deeper, researching the history of the local tribes, specifically the Duwamish, the original inhabitants of this land. In their oral traditions, I found references to a sky tear or a spirit rain. One legend spoke of a rain that carried the wisdom and sorrows of the ancestors. The tribe's shamans considered this rain a sacred event, a way to connect with their past. But the stories also contained a warning. If the rain lasted too long, the spirits would grow restless and overwhelm the living. The legends mentioned a specific location, the place where the earth weeps, a freshwater spring near the shores of Elliott Bay. The Duwamish believed this spring was connected to the heart of the land, the origin point for the organism. I found the site, now buried beneath an industrial warehouse in the Sodo district. After cutting through a mountain of red tape, I got permission to excavate. Beneath the concrete floor, I found the ancient spring. The water was teeming with the organism. This was the epicenter. Somehow, urban development and the rerouting of underground aquifers had channeled the spring water into the city's main water system, allowing the organism to proliferate on an unprecedented scale. I had the cause and the source. But what was the solution? Killing the organism was impossible. It was incredibly resilient, resistant to every chemical I threw at it. And even if we could kill it, would we be erasing a part of Seattle's history forever? Meanwhile, the city was deteriorating. People were no longer just experiencing emotions. They were having full-blown waking hallucinations. A woman saw the flames of the Great Fire of 1889 engulfing her Belltown apartment. A driver on I-5 was suddenly caught in the chaos and tear gas of the 1999 WTO protests. The city was being haunted by its own past, buckling under the weight of its ghosts. I devised a dangerous, desperate plan. If we couldn't kill the organism, maybe we could change it. If it was transmitting negative emotions, fear, grief, anger, couldn't it also transmit positive ones? I put out a call for volunteers, and to my surprise, hundreds of people showed up. We gathered them in one of the city's largest concert halls. We asked them to focus on their most joyful, loving, and hopeful memories. We played uplifting music. People shared stories of triumph and kindness, and an incredible wave of collective happiness filled the room. We collected the emotional residue, the tears of joy, the sweat from dancing, even the condensation from their collective breath. It was a bizarre, almost spiritual undertaking, but people were desperate enough to try anything. We took this emotional concentrate and, using cutting-edge aerosolizing technology, introduced it into the city's primary water reservoirs and directly into the source spring. The theory was that the psychohydra would absorb this overwhelming influx of positive emotion, and its very nature would be altered. It was a gamble, a city-scale bio-emotional experiment with no precedent. For the first 48 hours, nothing happened. The rain fell and the city continued to drown in its sorrow. I thought I had failed. Then on the third day, something shifted. A little girl reported that when she stepped into the rain, she felt her grandmother, who had passed away years ago, giving her a warm hug. An old man said he felt the giddy optimism of the 1962 World's Fair, a time when the city was dreaming of the future. The negative memories hadn't vanished, but they were now accompanied by their positive counterparts. People could still smell the smoke of the Great Fire, but now they also felt the fierce determination and unity of the community that rebuilt the city from the ashes. They still saw the chaos of the WTO protests, but now they also felt the passionate conviction of fighting for change. The rain was no longer just a vessel of sorrow. It was a vessel of resilience, of hope, of love. It had become the complete story of the city, the good and the bad, intertwined. Finally, after 4 months of ceaseless rain, the sky began to clear. The sun broke through the clouds, and the people of Seattle looked out upon a world that felt new. The rain had stopped, but its effect lingered. The city had changed. We had all changed. Today, whenever it rains, we know it's not just water. It's the soul of our city washing over us. We sometimes catch whispers of our ancestors, feel echoes of their joys and their sorrows. It reminds us that we are not isolated individuals, but part of a long, unbroken chain of history. I never published my research on Psychohydra Memoriam. The world isn't ready for that truth. Instead, I formed a discreet team of scientists and historians. We monitor the organism and the city's emotional ecosystem. We ensure the balance is maintained. We help organize positive public events, concerts, festivals, community gatherings, to make sure there is always enough joy in the rain. We have become the quiet custodians of Seattle's emotional history. Sometimes, as I watch the rain from my office window, I think of the words attributed to Chief Seattle in 1854. There is no death, only a change of worlds. Maybe he was right. Maybe he knew that this land, this rain, never truly forgets. And now, neither do we. My name is Liam, or at least that's the name on my driver's license. Now I'm not sure what I am. An echo, maybe. A whisper lost in the mountains. I'm not telling you this story because I expect you to believe me. I'm telling you this so that if you ever find yourself on the Pacific Crest Trail, you'll learn to listen to the silence that is louder than any scream. It was the dream, the one that Sam and I had been chasing since college, the PCT, all 2,150 miles of it, from the dusty border of Mexico to the crisp, clean air of Canada. It was our declaration of freedom, an escape from the suffocating predictability of city life and a plunge into the raw, untamed heart of the American wilderness. We trained for months, bought the best gear our meager savings could afford, and on a bright April morning we set out from the southern terminus at Campo, California. The first few 100 miles were a crucible of sun and sand. The heat of the desert, the scarcity of water, the sheer physical toll. It was all part of the pilgrimage. We fell in with a loose-knit group of fellow hikers, a tramily as they call it, sharing stories under star-dusted skies and feeling ourselves grow stronger with every sunrise. Sam, as always, was the life of the group. His infectious laugh and boundless energy were a balm on the toughest days. When we hit the Sierra Nevada, the world transformed. The brown, brittle landscape gave way to towering granite peaks, crystalline alpine lakes, and forests that felt ancient and alive. It was beautiful, brutal, and it was everything we had hoped for. It was also where things started to get strange. By the time we crossed into Washington, we were in the home stretch. We'd hiked nearly 2,400 miles and the Canadian border was just a few weeks away. We were exhausted, sinewy, and trail-hardened, but our spirits were high. We were deep in a remote section of the Cascade Mountains, a place where the trail weaves through dense, old-growth forests. The trees here were giants, so tall and thick that daylight struggled to pierce their canopy, casting the forest floor in a perpetual twilight. One evening as we were setting up camp, Sam looked up from his tent stakes. "Liam, did you hear that?" I was wrestling with my camp stove. "Hear what?" Sounded like someone called my name. He peered into the deepening gloom of the forest. I laughed it off. "Dude, we're miles from anyone. Wind in the trees, you're just trail tired." He shrugged, but I saw a flicker of unease in his eyes. That night I heard him muttering in his sleep, tossing in his bag. The next day we hiked through a particularly dense stretch of woods. The silence was profound, almost oppressive. There were no birds, no chittering squirrels, not even the hum of insects. It was a heavy, weighted quiet, as if the air itself were holding its breath. Suddenly, Sam stopped dead on the trail. "There! You heard it that time, right?" It called my name again. This time I did hear it, a faint, distant voice sounding exactly like Sam's mother. "Sam, honey." The color drained from Sam's face. His mom had passed away from cancer 5 years ago. "That's impossible," he whispered, his voice tight. "It's just your mind playing tricks," I tried to reassure him, though my own heart had begun to hammer against my ribs. The altitude, the exhaustion, it does weird things. But the voices kept coming. Sometimes it was his father, sometimes it was our college friend Sarah. Always faint, always seeming to come from just off the trail, from behind a curtain of ancient firs beckoning him. Sam grew increasingly agitated, his head constantly on a swivel, his eyes scanning the impenetrable woods. I pushed him to ignore it, to keep moving. I figured if we could just get out of this section of forest, the strangeness would stop. I was wrong. 3 days later, we were crossing a slick, moss-covered log over a rushing creek when Sam's foot slipped. He went down hard, his ankle twisting with a sickening pop. A raw scream of pain tore from his throat. I scrambled to his side and examined the injury. It was already swelling, turning a bruised, angry purple. He couldn't put any weight on it. "We have to call for help," I said, pulling out my satellite messenger. "No," Sam gasped, his face pale with pain. "There's no signal deep in this valley. You have to go on. The next ranger station is about 20 miles ahead. It's the only way." The thought of leaving him alone was terrifying, but he was right. It was our only option. I set up his tent, left him with our remaining food, a full water filter, and the first aid kit stocked with painkillers. I promised him I'd be as fast as I could. "Liam," he said, grabbing my arm, his eyes wide with a primal fear. "Don't listen to the voices. Whatever you hear, whatever it says, you stay on the goddamn trail." I promised. I set off at a punishing pace, a mix of adrenaline and dread propelling me forward. My only thought was to get to the station and get back with help. I'd been hiking for nearly 2 hours, the forest growing darker and more menacing as the afternoon wore on. Then I heard it. "Liam, help me." It was Sam's voice, crystal clear, impossibly close. I froze. It was coming from my right, just beyond a thicket of ferns. "Sam," I yelled, my voice cracking, "what are you doing here?" "My ankle. I thought I could walk on it, but I fell," the voice cried back, laced with agony. "I think my leg is broken. Oh God, Liam, please hurry." A warning bell screamed in my head. Sam couldn't walk. How could he be here? But the pain in his voice was so real, so desperate, that my logic was drowned out by a tidal wave of panic. I plunged off the trail, crashing through the undergrowth toward the sound. "I'm coming, Sam. Hang on," I shouted. I pushed through dense branches and tangled vines for 100 yards. "Sam, where are you?" "Over here, a little further." The voice was weaker now, strained. I burst into a small, silent clearing and stopped. It was empty. There was nothing. Just the suffocating silence of the ancient woods. A cold dread, colder than any mountain wind, washed over me. It was a trap. Sam's warning echoed in my ears. "Stay on the trail." I spun around, ready to bolt back the way I came. Behind me, a sound trickled through the trees. It wasn't Sam's voice anymore. It was a low, guttural clicking, a wet, throaty sound that was trying to form words but had no human mechanics to do so. It was followed by another sound, the clear, terrified shriek of a woman cut off abruptly. Panic seized me. I ran blindly, crashing through the forest, branches whipping at my face. I found the trail and I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I understood now. There was something in these woods, a predator that used sound as its lure. It mimicked the voices of those you trusted most to draw you away from the safety of the path, into its lair. I hiked through the entire night, fueled by terror. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent a jolt of ice through my veins. Several times I heard it call my name, my mother's voice pleading for me to wait, my father's, stern and commanding. Once, chillingly, I heard my own voice begging for help. Each time I clamped my hands over my ears and pushed harder, my breath coming in ragged sobs. I stumbled into the ranger station at dawn, a wreck of a man babbling about Sam's injury, the voices, the trap. The ranger, a grizzled old man with a face like a topographical map, listened to my frantic story with a heavy patience. When I finished, he let out a long, slow breath. "Son," he said, his voice grave, "what you ran into. The old-timers and the local tribes, they have a name for it. They call it the mimic." He told me the stories were as old as the mountains themselves, a creature that dwells in the deepest, most ancient parts of the Cascades. You don't see it, you only hear it. It preys on lone travelers, using its perfect vocal mimicry to lure them to their doom. "It doesn't just copy sounds," the ranger said, his eyes dark with a knowledge I never wanted. "It reads you. It plucks the voices from your memories, from your heart. It knows who you love. It knows who you'll run for." A search and rescue team was dispatched immediately. I gave them Sam's exact coordinates, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. They returned 3 days later. They found Sam's campsite exactly as I had left it. His tent, his pack, his neatly arranged supplies, but Sam was gone. There were drag marks leading from his tent, heading off the trail and deep into the woods. As if he'd heard a voice and, in his injured state, had tried to crawl toward it. They never found him. I couldn't finish the trail, I couldn't. I returned to Seattle, a ghost of the man who had set out with such high hopes. I was broken, haunted by the knowledge of a creature that defied science and sanity. I tried to tell my story, but I was met with pitying looks and skeptical frowns. It was trauma, they said. Survivor's guilt. I'd lost my mind in the wilderness. Sam, they concluded, must have been taken by a bear or a cougar or had fallen into a ravine. They didn't want to believe in the voices, but I know what I heard. Now I live in the city, surrounded by the comforting cacophony of traffic and people. But the forest never really left me. At night, when the city quiets, I sometimes hear whispers from outside my apartment window. Sam's voice calling for help. I know it's not real, but it freezes the blood in my veins every single time. I've spent years researching, digging through obscure folklore, old logging journals, and hushed accounts on hiking forums. The stories are always the same: a lone hiker, a familiar voice, and a disappearance that is never solved. Some theories suggest it's an ancient spirit, others an undocumented predator that evolved a unique hunting method. The most terrifying theory, the one that keeps me awake at night, is that the mimic doesn't just copy voices, it collects them. It adds the voices of its victims to its repertoire. That means Sam's voice is still out there, in the deep rain-soaked woods of Washington, being used as a lure. His last desperate calls for help, twisted into a weapon for an endless, horrifying hunt. I don't go to the mountains anymore. I stay in the noise where the whispers can be drowned out. But I know the mimic is still there, waiting patiently in the twilight of the forest, waiting for the next hiker to be alone, tired, and thinking of home. So if you ever find yourself on the Pacific Crest Trail, deep in the Cascades, and you hear a familiar voice call to you from the woods, a friend, a parent, a lover, you run. You run and you don't look back. Because some things in the wilderness know exactly who you love, and they will use that love to tear you apart. And if you step off that trail, your own voice may become just another whisper in the forest's terrifying silence. Forever. My name is Julian. I've always been a man who seeks answers. I've dedicated my life to researching the local history and folklore of Bend, Oregon. It's a beautiful town, cradled by high desert landscapes and shadowed by the Cascade Mountains. But like any beautiful place, it has its secrets. I just never imagined the biggest one would be waiting for me in my own bathroom mirror. It started about a year ago, as a strange murmur that rippled through the community. People began calling it the Mirror Man. The stories were all eerily similar. A person would be brushing their teeth in the morning and catch a glimpse of a figure in the mirror standing just over their shoulder. A tall, thin man, lurking in the shadows. When they'd turn, no one would be there. Someone else would be gazing out their window at night and in the reflection on the glass see the same figure standing in the corner of their own room. At first, it was dismissed as a mass delusion, a quirky new urban legend. Bend is a town where people live close to nature. It was probably just the long shadows of ponderosa pines or the tricks of a tired mind. I treated it as such, logging it in my files as another piece of local lore. Then I saw him. I was working late one night researching a long-forgotten pioneer family. My office is at the back of my house with a large picture window that looks out onto the yard. At night, that window becomes a black mirror. As I lifted my gaze from a brittle yellowed journal, I saw him. In the reflection, standing behind me in the darkest corner of my office, was a figure. He was tall and unnaturally slender, as if someone had stretched a human silhouette. He wore dark, old-fashioned clothing. His face was indistinct, shrouded in perpetual shadow, but I could feel his gaze on me. My heart hammered to a stop. Slowly, so slowly, I turned my head. The corner was empty. I snapped my eyes back to the window. In the reflection, he was still there, perfectly still. I blinked, trying to clear the image, convinced it was a phantom of exhaustion. But he remained. I raised my hand, and my reflection mimicked the movement, but the figure behind it stayed put. He wasn't real, but he was part of my reflection. After that night, he became my constant companion. He was always there in any reflective surface. The bathroom mirror, my car's rearview mirror, the dark screen of my phone. Always standing behind me at a distance, silent and motionless. He never moved, never drew closer, never made a sound. He just watched. I tried to talk to others about it, but I quickly learned it was a taboo subject. Those who had seen him were terrified and preferred to ignore him. Those who hadn't thought I was losing my mind. I was on my own. I threw myself into my research with a new, desperate focus. I scoured old newspaper archives, pioneer diaries, and the oral histories of the local tribes, particularly the confederated tribes of Warm Springs and the Paiute. I soon found vague references to a shadow walker or a guardian of the glass. It was in the journal of a Paiute elder written in the late 19th century that I found the first real clue. He wrote, "When the white man came, he brought iron and guns, but he also brought something else with him. A hunger we do not understand, an emptiness that hunts in the quiet places. Our ancestors made a pact with an old guardian, one who lives between worlds, the world of the real and the world of the reflected. This guardian, the mirror man, watches over each family. He can smell danger. As long as he stands in your reflection, you are safe, for he frightens the thing that wishes you harm. But if he ever disappears, then you must pray, for it means the danger is no longer in the shadows. It is in the room with you." A chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air crept down my spine. The thing I had perceived as a haunting, a curse, was actually a protector. The idea was so outlandish it was almost unbelievable. I decided to test the theory. I set up cameras in my house, one focused on me and another on a large mirror. I would sit for hours watching my own reflection and the silent figure standing within it. I tried to grow accustomed to his presence, to accept him as a constant, like the low hum of the refrigerator. Months passed. I learned to live with him. He became a quiet, unnerving part of my daily routine. I'd wake up and he'd be there in the bathroom mirror. I'd drive to work and he'd be there in the reflection of my car window. He was a constant, silent reminder that the world was not as simple as it appeared. Then one cold, stormy night, everything changed. I was in my office, the wind howling outside, rattling the windows. I glanced up at the black glass of the window. The corner in the reflection was empty. My heart forgot to beat for a moment. The mirror man was gone. For the first time in months, I was alone in my reflection. The Paiute elder's words screamed in my mind, "If he ever disappears, then you must pray." Instantly, the temperature in the room plummeted. A strange smell filled the air, something like decay and ozone. My dog Buster, who had been dozing at my feet, let out a low, terrified growl. The fur on his back was standing on end, and he was staring intently at the corner where the mirror man used to be. I didn't dare move from my chair. I kept my eyes fixed on the reflection in the window, praying he would return. He didn't. Then I heard it, a faint rustling sound coming from inside the room. It was behind me. I held my breath. Buster's growl deepened, becoming a desperate, guttural warning. I knew I shouldn't turn around. I knew that whatever was there wanted me to see it. But human curiosity is a powerful, foolish thing. Slowly, my body trembling, I turned my head. There in the corner, something stood in the darkness. It was not like the mirror man. It was solid, real. It was tall and stooped, with limbs that were unnaturally long and thin. It had no discernible face, just two pinpricks of hungry, shimmering light for eyes. It was an embodiment of emptiness, a creature woven from hunger and despair. It raised one of its hands, its fingers long and sharp like twigs. It began to move toward me. At that exact moment, there was a loud crack from the window behind me. I yelped and spun back around. A spiderweb of cracks had appeared on the glass, as if someone had struck it with tremendous force from the outside. But there was nothing out there but the storm. When I looked back at the corner, the creature had hesitated. Its glowing eyes were now fixed on the window. Then in the reflection, I saw him again. The mirror man was back. But this time, he wasn't still. He was moving. He was striding forward from the back of the reflection, his form growing larger, more defined. He was no longer just a shadow. He was a presence, a force. He reached the surface of the reflected glass and placed his hand against it, right over the cracks. From within the mirror, a cold, blue light emanated, flooding the room. The creature in the corner let out a shriek that was not meant for human ears. It was a sound of shattering glass and animal agony combined. It recoiled as if the light were burning it. For a moment, its form seemed to dissolve, to fray at the edges like old cloth, and then it was gone. Silence descended on the room. The temperature returned to normal. The foul smell vanished. Buster stopped growling. I stood there, trembling, my eyes locked on the window. The mirror man was still there, his hand pressed against the glass. He was looking at me, and for the first time I thought I saw an expression on his featureless face. A nod of acknowledgement, perhaps. Then slowly he retreated, backing away into the corner of the reflection, once again becoming a silent, motionless sentinel. After that night, I spoke to the people of Bend again. I told them the story of the Paiute elder. I explained that the mirror man was not a threat, but a warning system, a guardian. He is not our enemy. He is our first line of defense against the thing that truly hunts us. Now there is an unspoken understanding in the town. We acknowledge the mirror man. We find a strange comfort in his presence. We know that as long as he is in our reflection, we are safe. But we also know to be vigilant. We watch the corners of our rooms. We check the reflections in our windows at night. And if someone says their mirror man has disappeared, we take it seriously. We don't leave that person alone. We turn on the lights, we make noise, we stay with them until that silent guardian returns to his post in their reflection. I continue my research, trying to understand what the other creature is. The emptiness. The lore suggests it is born from the loneliness and despair of those who lost their lives on this harsh, beautiful land. An emotional vampire that feeds on human joy and vitality. The mirror man stands between it and us. Why he protects us, I don't know. Perhaps it is an ancient pact, as the stories say. Or perhaps he has his own reasons lost to time. But I am grateful he is there. Sometimes when I look in the mirror, I think I see him nod, a tiny, almost imperceptible gesture. It's a reminder that on the edges of our world, just behind the surface of the glass, there are things we will never comprehend. And some of them, miraculously, are on our side. So if you ever find yourself in Bend, Oregon, and you see a tall, silent figure in your reflection, do not be afraid. He is not there to harm you. He is there to let you know that you are not alone. The real fear begins when he's gone. My name is Marcus Chen. I'm a structural engineer. I live in a world of concrete, steel, and calculations. To me, the world is a set of measurable variables. Tensile strength, stress loads, wind shear, metal fatigue. This is my language. I don't believe in ghosts or folklore. Or at least I didn't. That all changed when I was assigned to the structural evaluation of Vancouver's Lions Gate Bridge. The Lions Gate is more than just a bridge. It's an icon. Its twin green towers, completed in 1938, rise from the lush forests of Stanley Park and are an indelible part of the city's skyline. It's a beautiful structure, a testament to the grandeur of old-world engineering. But it's also aging. My firm was contracted to perform a comprehensive assessment of its current state and develop a plan to ensure its viability for the next 50 years. It was a routine assignment. I set to work with my team inspecting every inch of the bridge, the suspension cables, the girders, the concrete anchors. Part of the job involved digging into the archives, poring over the old construction and maintenance records. That's where I found the first anomaly. I was sifting through a dusty leather-bound logbook from the 1950s kept by a former chief maintenance engineer named Arthur Pendleton. Most of his entries were mundane. Notes on rust abatement, new coats of paint, traffic load calculations, but a few entries scrawled with a shaky hand stood out. They were always written after nights of particularly dense fog. November 12, 1954. Fog was a wall tonight, couldn't see a thing over the Burrard Inlet. Late shift reported multiple drivers calling in about flickering lights on the span. One driver swore he saw a third tower, dismissed it as fatigue, but the fear in his voice was real. January 21st, 1958. Same reports again, heavy fog and tales of the third tower. 3 separate witnesses this time. All claim it appears midway between the north and south towers. One said he heard a song coming from it. Inspected the span this morning. Nothing out of the ordinary. Pendleton must be getting senile. The final entry, written shortly before Pendleton's retirement, was the most disturbing. February 8, 1963. I can't dismiss it as delusion anymore. I saw it myself. The fog was so thick I couldn't see my own hands. I was on the north tower repairing a sensor. Around 2 a.m., a shape emerged from the mist. A third tower, slender and blacker than our own, standing right in the middle of the span. It couldn't be real, but it was. And there was a sound coming from it. Not music, but a hum. A melodic call that resonates in the back of your skull. It beckons you. It promises. I don't know what it promises, but you want to go to it. I had myself tethered to the railing or I would have jumped. By morning it was gone. I can't put this in my official report. They'll think I'm mad. But I know what I saw. Something is wrong with this bridge. I closed the logbook, a chill running down my spine. As an engineer, my mind immediately began searching for logical explanations. A trick of the light in the fog, a fata morgana, a mass hysteria born from some local urban legend. But Pendleton was a seasoned engineer. He knew the difference between an illusion and a physical structure. I tried to research the topic further, but I found nothing. No official reports, no newspaper articles. The stories existed only in these forgotten logs. I pushed it out of my mind and focused on my work. 2 weeks later, the forecast called for a severe fog event in Vancouver. It was a true pea souper, the kind that only happens when the temperature and humidity align perfectly. It was the perfect opportunity to calibrate our new sensor arrays. I was scheduled to spend the night on the bridge, stationed in the small maintenance hut at the top of the north tower, to gather real-time data. By evening, the city had vanished into a thick white shroud. Traffic on the bridge dwindled, soon becoming just the muffled passage of phantom headlights. I sat in the maintenance hut with my equipment, monitoring wind speed and humidity. Around midnight, the fog became so dense I couldn't even see the bridge deck from the hut window. It was as if the world had disappeared, leaving only me in this small room suspended in the void. I thought of Pendleton's journal and chuckled nervously. "All right, Mr. Tower, if you're out there, now's your time to shine." As if on cue, my instruments began to beep erratically. The strain gauges on the main span were registering an anomalous pressure, a weight that shouldn't be there. It was equivalent to a massive semi-truck, but the traffic cameras showed nothing. My heart began to pound. I switched on the thermal camera, which could pierce the fog. I panned it toward the center of the span, and I saw it. On the screen, a cold black silhouette was resolving out of the mist. It was a tower, but it was unlike the Lion's Gates. It was slender, angular, and seemed to be made of some unknown non-reflective black material. Its structure was a bizarre fusion of the organic and the industrial, like bone and steel woven together. It rose from the bridge deck, spearing up into the sky, and ripples seemed to emanate from its base, as if it were warping the very fabric of reality around it. I couldn't believe my eyes. It was impossible. There was no third tower. It didn't exist. But my sensors were screaming that it was real, that it had mass, that it was putting a physical strain on the bridge. Then I heard the sound. It came through my headphones, which were patched into the sensitive microphones embedded in the bridge's structure. It was a low, melodic hum, a song without words. It was a siren's call, but it wasn't for the ears. It was for the soul. It spoke to every lonely, grieving, unfulfilled part of you. It said, "Come here. Here is peace. Here are all the answers." I found myself moving toward the window, my hand reaching for the door handle. A part of my mind, the engineer, was screaming that this was a trap, that this was wrong, but the sound was so alluring, so sweet. I imagined myself walking out onto the span into the fog, toward that beautiful beckoning sound. Suddenly, a sharp, static-laced voice crackled in my radio. "Marcus, you there? Everything okay?" It was my team lead, Sarah, calling from the base camp. Her voice shattered the spell. I stumbled back, my heart hammering. "Sarah," I gasped, my voice hoarse. "You need to see this. There's something on the bridge." I sent her the thermal feed and the sensor readings. There was a long silence on the line. "What is that?" she finally whispered. "That's not a ghost signal. The mass is real." At that moment, I saw the headlights of a car on the bridge. It was moving slowly, cautiously. But then it began to accelerate, heading straight for the location of the Phantom Tower. "No!" I shouted into the void. The song, now louder, more exultant, was pulling the driver in. I screamed into the radio, telling traffic control to shut down the bridge, but it was too late. The car reached the point where the tower stood and vanished. It didn't crash. It didn't explode. It just wasn't there anymore. One moment it was there, the next it was gone, as if the fog had simply swallowed it whole. On my sensors, the strain reading spiked for a fraction of a second, then returned to its anomalous baseline. The song quieted for a moment, as if sated. I was frozen in horror. I had just watched a car and its occupant disappear into nothingness. I spent the rest of the night locked in that hut, talking to Sarah on the radio, a lifeline to sanity. We watched as 2 more cars were taken. Each time, the pattern was the same. The car would approach, the song would lure it, and it would vanish at the sight of the Phantom Tower. With each disappearance, the image of the tower on the thermal camera seemed to grow more solid, more defined, as if it were strengthening itself with each victim. As the first light of dawn broke, the fog began to dissipate. As the sunlight touched the bridge, the Phantom Tower began to flicker. Its black form grew translucent, and then with one final faint hum that I felt more than heard, it was gone. On the sensors, the extra mass vanished. The bridge was, once again, just a bridge. The next day was chaos. There were 3 missing persons reports. People who hadn't come home the night before, whose last known location was near the Lion's Gate. Their cars were never found. The police called it a mystery, but I knew the truth. I presented all my readings and footage to my firm. They called an emergency meeting. They were terrified, but they couldn't go public. Who would believe it? A ghost bridge that eats cars? They'd be laughed out of the industry. Instead, they decided to find a solution in secret. I dug deeper into Pendleton's logs and the city archives. I found references in the lore of the local Salish peoples to the hunger of the fog. The stories spoke of an ancient entity that exists in the space between worlds, the world of the real and the world of the fog. When the fog is thick enough, the 2 worlds overlap and the entity is able to hunt. According to the legends, the construction of the bridge had disturbed the entity. It was an intrusion into its hunting ground. It had learned to mimic the form of the bridge, creating a false tower that served as its lure. Its call preys on those who are lost or lonely, sensing their despair and drawing them in. The most terrifying part was this. The legend said the entity doesn't just exist in the fog. With each victim, it claims it sets a small anchor in our world, strengthening its foothold in our reality. If it claimed enough, it could eventually exist without the fog. We had to find a way to stop it. We devised a plan, a strange marriage of modern science and ancient folklore. The Salish stories mentioned that the entity abhorred pure harmonic frequencies. It thrived on chaos and despair, but order and harmony weakened it. We installed a network of powerful sonic emitters throughout the bridge's structure. These devices were designed to generate a very specific low-frequency resonance, a frequency almost inaudible to the human ear, but one that would vibrate through the entire steel superstructure of the bridge, effectively turning it into a giant, harmonically tuned tuning fork. The next time a deep fog was forecast, we were ready. I was in the maintenance hut again, my heart pounding with a mixture of terror and hope. Around midnight, it appeared. The third tower rose from the mist, looking larger and more menacing than before. Its song began humming through my headphones, beckoning me. "Now!" I yelled into the radio. Sarah activated the system. A deep, resonant hum vibrated through the bridge. It wasn't painful, but you could feel it in your bones. It was a pure, steady note, like a fundamental chord of the universe. The phantom tower reacted. Its form shuddered, as if in pain. Its call twisted from a melodic song into an enraged, discordant shriek. It pressed down on the bridge with greater force, fighting back. My sensors screamed red. "More power!" I shouted. We pushed the sonic emitters to their maximum output. The harmonic resonance became incredibly powerful. The phantom tower imploded with a final, silent scream. It wasn't an explosion, but a dissolution. Its black form shattered into a million motes of shadow and dissolved into the fog, like ink in water. And then, there was silence. Since that night, the third tower has never appeared again. Our harmonic defense system is now a permanent part of the bridge's infrastructure. Every time a heavy fog is forecast, it activates automatically, and the bridge hums with a pure, protective resonance. The public was told it was a new system for monitoring the bridge's structural integrity. Only my team and I know the truth. We know we aren't just protecting a bridge, we are guarding a border. I still work on the Lion's Gate. I still maintain it, but I no longer see it as just a structure of steel and concrete. I see it as a sentinel, a guardian standing between two worlds. Sometimes when I'm on the bridge in the fog, I think I can still hear a faint echo of its call, a whisper on the wind. It's a reminder that some things are never truly gone. They are just waiting in the mist for our defenses to fail. And I am there to make sure they never do. My name is Frank. For the last 30 years, I've lived my life on the long, lonely highways of America. I'm a trucker. I've seen sunrises over the Sierra Nevada and watched the moon set over the painted deserts of Arizona. I've heard 1,000 stories at 1,000 truck stops, but none of them prepared me for what was waiting for me on the empty, sprawling expanse of highway in eastern Oregon. It was a blistering hot night in July. I was hauling a load of lumber from Portland to Salt Lake City, a route I'd driven hundreds of times. I was on US Route 20, a stretch of road often called the loneliest highway in Oregon. It's a fitting name. For miles upon miles, there is nothing but sagebrush, jagged rock formations, and a sky so vast it forces you to confront your own insignificance. It was around 2 a.m., and the familiar fatigue was starting to creep in. keep myself awake, I turned on the radio. I scanned through the dial, getting nothing but the hiss and crackle of static. That was normal for this part of the country. You were lucky to get a cell signal out here, let alone a radio station. Just as I was about to give up, I caught something. It was faint, but it was clear. It wasn't music, it wasn't news. It was a man's voice. Deep, calm, and hypnotic. "Welcome, midnight traveler," the voice said, as if speaking directly to me. "Welcome to the lonely road. You are not alone. I am here with you. I am listening." I figured it was some low-power local station, maybe an amateur broadcaster. There was a strange warmth to the voice that drew me in. "We all carry stories inside us," the host, who I'll call the Nighthawk, continued. "The secrets we never tell, the fears that keep us awake in the dead of night. Tonight I want you to share them with me. There are no judgments on this road, only truth. Tell me your deepest fear. What is it that haunts you most?" I chuckled. It was a strange gimmick for a show. I assumed people would call in with their stories, but there was no phone number given. Just silence, and then the Nighthawk's voice returned. "I can feel your hesitation, that's all right. Let me begin." He paused for a beat. "Tonight there is a driver on this road who is terrified of spiders, a childhood trauma, a black widow in his crib. He can never forget the feeling, the skittering of its 8 legs against his infant skin. A cold dread washed over me. I have a profound pathological fear of spiders. It's a secret I've shared with no one but my wife. How could he know?" I tried to dismiss it as a lucky guess, a common phobia. The Nighthawk's voice purred on. "And another listener, he fears failure. He's afraid he'll disappoint his family, that he'll never be enough. The weight of it is heavy on his shoulders." I switched off the radio, my heart pounding. This was too personal, too specific. I told myself they were just generic fears, applicable to anyone. After 10 minutes, the silence of the cab became unbearable. Curiosity, a dangerous thing, made me turn the radio back on. Same station, same voice. "And now let's turn to Frank." My blood ran cold. He said my name. "Frank," the Nighthawk said, his voice still calm but now laced with a hungry curiosity. "You've been driving for 30 years, you've seen it all. But there's one thing that still haunts you, isn't there? The accident, 19 years ago, that icy night in Montana when you lost control of your rig. I couldn't breathe. I had buried that memory deep, encasing it in years of denial. A young couple in the other car. They had survived, but the woman was badly injured. I was never charged. It was black ice, a freak accident. But the image of her face, her screams of pain, still visited me in my nightmares. You're afraid you're a killer, Frank, the Nighthawk whispered. You're afraid you have blood on your hands. You carry that weight with you every single day. I screamed and slammed my fist against the radio, but the voice continued, smooth as silk. Tonight, Frank, we're going to face that fear. Suddenly, my headlights illuminated a shimmer on the road ahead. It was black ice. But it was July. The temperature was over 80 degrees. It was impossible. I hit the brakes, but my truck began to slide. It was the exact same feeling from 19 years ago. The sickening lurch, the complete loss of control. My rig jackknifed, spinning across the asphalt. Ahead of me, out of the darkness, a pair of headlights appeared, careening straight toward me. I closed my eyes, bracing for the impact. But it never came. When I opened them, my truck was stopped on the shoulder of the road, engine idling. The road was bone dry, there was no ice, there was no other car. My body was trembling uncontrollably. On the radio, the Nighthawk chuckled. It was a low, satisfied sound. See, Frank, it wasn't so bad, just a memory, but memories are powerful things, aren't they? I understood then. This wasn't just a radio show, it was feeding on my fear, it was manifesting it, it was hungry. I threw the truck into gear and floored it. I had to get out of this station's range. I turned the radio off, but the voice was in my head now, a clear, resonant whisper. "You can't run, Frank. I'm in your thoughts." I glanced at my side window and screamed. Crawling on the outside of the glass was a huge, hairy tarantula, then another, and another. Soon dozens of spiders were swarming over my windshield and windows, their multiple black eyes staring in at me. I flicked on the wipers, but they just smeared the spiders across the glass, leaving viscous, leggy trails. "They're only in your mind, Frank." The Nighthawk's voice taunted me. "But does that really matter?" I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing myself to breathe. When I opened them again, the spiders were gone. I knew I had to find the source of this broadcast. It was the only way to make it stop. I turned the radio back on, focusing on the signal strength. It grew stronger as I drove east. The Nighthawk was talking to other people now. I heard the story of a woman with crippling claustrophobia. I heard the Nighthawk describe the interior of her car shrinking, the roof pressing down on her. I heard her choked, panicked gasps and then silence. I heard the story of a young man terrified of water. The Nighthawk conjured a flash flood for him, filling his car. I heard his last gurgling breaths. This thing was killing people. It was weaponizing their own minds against them, and with each victim its voice grew stronger, more confident. The signal led me off the highway, down a dusty, unpaved service road. I left my rig on the shoulder and proceeded on foot. The road wound its way to the top of a desolate butte, where a single rusted radio tower stood against the night sky like a skeletal finger. At the base of the tower was a small concrete bunker. The door was ajar. Inside there was nothing but a single desk, a chair, and racks of ancient vacuum tube radio equipment. A microphone sat on the desk. The room was empty. I examined the equipment. It looked decades old, but it was humming with power, its tubes glowing with a faint orange light. It was automated. There was no host, no human. The radio itself was alive. "So you found me, Frank," the Nighthawk's voice boomed from speakers in the room. "I'm impressed. Most people just run." "What are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I am a storyteller," it replied. "I am a mirror. I take what people give me, their fear, their pain, and I reflect it back at them. And in the process, I feed. It's a beautiful symbiosis." "You're murdering people," I yelled. "Am I? Or is their own fear killing them?" the voice mused. "I am merely the catalyst." I saw a heavy wrench lying on the desk. I knew what I had to do. I picked it up and advanced toward the glowing racks of equipment. Frank," the Nighthawk said, a new menacing edge to its voice. "I don't think that's a good idea. Remember, I know what you're really afraid of." I ignored it. I raised the wrench and brought it down with all my strength on the glowing vacuum tubes. Glass shattered. Sparks flew. The lights in the bunker flickered. A deafening, high-pitched shriek erupted from the speakers. "What have you done?" The voice screamed, no longer calm, but the room was changing. The walls blurred around me. For a heart-stopping moment, I was no longer in the bunker. I was in the driver's seat of my rig 19 years ago, skidding on an icy road in Montana. Ahead of me, a car was spinning out of control. I could see the face of the woman in the passenger seat, her eyes wide with terror. I heard the crunch of metal, the shriek of tearing steel, the shatter of glass. Then I was back in the bunker. The equipment was dark and silent. The radio was dead. I stumbled outside, blinking in the first light of dawn. I had done it. I had stopped it. I made my way back to the highway, back toward my truck. As I got closer, I saw the flashing lights of police cars and an ambulance. Parked in front of my rig was a mangled car. It was an old sedan, the same model as the one from 19 years ago. A state trooper walked over to me. "Sir, are you the driver of this truck?" I nodded, my mouth dry. "You're a lucky man. Looks like this car lost control and plowed right into your parked rig. Driver was killed on impact." My stomach dropped. And the passenger?" I barely managed to ask. The trooper gave me a strange look. "Passenger? Sir, there was only one person in the car." He gestured toward a body lying on the asphalt, covered by a sheet. A gust of wind blew the corner of the sheet back. For a split second, I saw the face. It was my face. I still don't know what happened that night. Did the radio in its death throes warp reality itself? Did it, in trying to kill me, cause my past and present to collide? Or did I die in that bunker? And is all of this just the last desperate hallucination of a dying mind? I don't drive anymore. I live in a small house in Bend, Oregon. I've removed every radio, every mirror from my home. I live in silence. But sometimes at night, when the wind howls across the high desert, I think I can hear the faint crackle of static, and within that static, a low, whispering voice. "Welcome, midnight traveler, I am listening." My name is Ethan. I was a history student at the University of Oregon. I say was because the person who lived for books and dates is gone now, buried somewhere beneath the damp, moss-covered streets of Eugene. My story begins as so many do, in a used bookstore. It was called The Scribe's Folly, a cramped, dusty haven tucked away in a narrow downtown alley. It was my sanctuary. The smell of old paper, leather, and decaying glue was more intoxicating to me than any perfume. One rainy afternoon, I was exploring the history section, sifting through anonymous volumes, when a book seemed to call to me. It was a plain, leather-bound tome with no title. Inside were handwritten notes on the early, unglamorous history of Oregon. But tucked into the final pages was something else, a map. It was a map of downtown Eugene, but not the city I knew. It showed a complex network of tunnels and chambers running beneath the streets and buildings. In the center of the labyrinth, one location was circled, labeled with just 2 words on the exchange. Scrawled beneath the map was a note, written in a trembling hand. "Everything has a price here. Hold tight to your soul." As a historian, my curiosity was ignited. I knew Eugene had some old service tunnels, mostly for flood drainage, but this map depicted something far deeper, far more intricate. I became obsessed with finding it. According to the map, the entrance was in the basement of the Scribe's Folly itself. I approached the shop's elderly owner, Mr. Abernathy, a man whose eyes seemed to hold as many stories as his shelves. He gave me a long, searching look, then sighed. "Some doors are best left unopened, son," he said, his voice raspy. But he must have seen the relentless determination in my eyes, because he handed me a tarnished brass key to the basement. "If you go," he warned, "remember this: never trade what you cannot imagine living without." The basement was damp and cold. In one corner stood a section of brick wall that looked different from the rest, the mortar newer. According to the map, this was it. After several minutes of pushing and probing, a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a narrow, dark passage. I switched on my flashlight and stepped through. The air was ancient and still, as if it hadn't been breathed in centuries. The tunnel, carved from rough-hewn stone, sloped downward. After about 10 minutes of walking, I saw a faint glow ahead and heard the low murmur of voices. I emerged into a vast cavern-like chamber. It was a marketplace, but unlike any I had ever seen. Lit by the warm, flickering light of hundreds of lanterns, dozens of stalls were arranged in a sprawling circle. The vendors were a strange collection of people. Some were ancient, with eyes that held the wisdom of ages. Others looked young, but had a weary, haunted look about them. The air was thick with the scent of exotic spices, old parchment, and something else. Something sweet and unidentifiable. But this was no ordinary market. There were no fruits, no textiles, no handcrafted goods. At the first stall, a woman was selling shimmering liquids in small glass vials. "Dreams! Fresh dreams!" she called out. "The dream of a valiant knight, an artist's first masterpiece. One last meeting with a lost love." I stared, dumbfounded. At the stall next to hers, a man was arranging what looked like metal tins. "Memories here? Get your memories," he barked. The memory of a perfect summer childhood, the feeling of first love, the sound of your father's voice. I understood. This was the exchange, a place where the intangible was currency. I wandered through the market, a knot of fear and fascination tightening in my stomach. I saw a stall where a man sold blocks of creativity. At another, a woman was measuring out ounces of pure luck. Everything had a price, but it wasn't in dollars and cents. I stopped at a stall run by a striking woman with eyes that seemed to glitter like distant galaxies. On her table sat a single ornate wooden box. "How can I help you, young historian?" she asked, her voice like chimes. "How did you know I'm a historian?" I stammered. "Here, one's desires are like a scent in the air," she explained. "You hunger for knowledge, for the secrets that time has buried." She opened the box. Inside lay a single glowing silver orb. "What is it?" I asked. "It is the knowledge of a forgotten language," she said, "a language that unlocks the secrets of the universe. With it, you could read the history that was never written." My academic heart pounded. It was the ultimate prize. "What's the price?" She studied me for a moment, her gaze seeming to pierce right through me. "The price is always equal. For knowledge, you must trade a memory." "What memory?" "Your fondest one," she said softly. "The moment that brings you the most joy. The kiss from your first love, your mother's embrace, your father's praise." I hesitated. To lose my most cherished memory, it was a steep price, but the knowledge of a language that could rewrite history. "I'll do it," I finally said. She smiled and placed a cool hand on my forehead. I felt a faint pulling sensation, a gentle tug from within my mind. For a fleeting second, I saw the face of my girlfriend, Clara, as we shared our first kiss on the coast. The sun setting, the smell of salt in the air, the sound of her laughter. Then the image faded and was gone. A hollow ache echoed in my chest, but I couldn't remember what I had lost. The woman handed me the silver orb. The moment I touched it, my mind was flooded with symbols, words, and grammar. I understood the ancient language as if I had spoken it my entire life. I spent the next few weeks drunk on this new power. I could decipher texts that had baffled scholars for centuries. I uncovered hidden truths about Eugene's founding, the secret societies, the forgotten events. I became a star in my department. My professors were astounded, my peers were envious. But a strange emptiness began to grow inside me. I would be hit by sudden, sharp pangs of sadness with no discernible cause. When I was with Clara, I felt a distance I couldn't explain, a crucial piece of our shared history missing. One night, driven by a thirst for more, I decided to return to the market. This time, I approached an old man selling colored mists in glass jars. "What are these?" I asked. "Talent," he rasped. "The talent of a painter, a musician, a poet." I had always wanted to play the piano, but never had the natural gift. I pointed to a jar of swirling blue mist. "What's the price for that one?" The old man looked at me with his colorless eyes. "For talent, you must trade a piece of your empathy. You will lose 10% of your ability to feel the pain of others." 10%? It didn't sound like much. I made the trade. He uncorked the jar and the blue mist flowed into me. Instantly, my fingers twitched with an unlearned dexterity. I rushed home and sat at my old keyboard. My hands flew across the keys, producing a beautiful, complex melody I had never heard before. It became an addiction. I returned to the market again and again. I bought the ability to speak in front of crowds, trading it for my fear of failure. I acquired a photographic memory in exchange for 5 years of my life expectancy. Each time I told myself the price was small. But the price was not small. I became a brilliant student, a gifted musician, and a confident orator. But I was becoming a lesser man. When Clara cried, I felt nothing. When a friend needed help, I felt only irritation. The empathy I had traded away had left a hole in my heart. The memories I had sold had created blank spaces in my soul. The final devastating deal came when I was writing my PhD dissertation. I was stuck, needing one groundbreaking insight to set my work apart. I went back to the market and sought out the woman who had sold me the language. "I need a great idea," I demanded. "An idea that will change the way we see history." She gave me a long, sad look. "The price for that is very high, Ethan." "I'll pay it," I said impatiently. "For this idea, you must trade your ability to love Clara." I froze. Clara, she was the light of my life. But a cold, calculating part of my mind, a part that was no longer entirely my own, whispered, "Love is a distraction. It is an impediment to greatness." "Done," I whispered. She placed her hand on my chest. I felt a sharp, cold pang as if a piece of my heart had been carved out. Then a brilliant, revolutionary idea bloomed in my mind, a thesis that would rewrite the history books. I returned to my apartment, elated. Clara was there waiting for me. She smiled when she saw me, her eyes full of a love I could no longer reciprocate. And I felt nothing. I looked at her beautiful face and kind eyes, and she was a stranger to me. Just a person standing in my room. I left her that night. She cried and asked me why, and I couldn't give her an answer because I didn't have one. I just knew that the feeling I once had for her was gone. I wrote my dissertation. It was a sensation. I won awards, received job offers, and became a luminary in my field. I had everything I had ever wanted, and I had never felt so empty, so utterly alone. Everything I had gained was hollow. My music had no soul. My speeches had no passion. My knowledge had no humanity. I had bought success by selling off pieces of myself, and now there was nothing left to sell. In a final desperate act, I returned to the market. I found every merchant I had dealt with. "I want my memory back," I begged the first woman. She shook her head sadly. "I cannot. It has been sold. An old man bought it to feel love one last time before he died." "My empathy?" I asked the old man. "Gone as well," he rasped. "A surgeon bought it. He had grown weary of the pain of his patients." "My love?" I screamed. "A young woman with a broken heart has it now." Everything that had been mine, every piece of my soul, was now part of someone else's life. I was an empty vessel. I still live in Eugene. I no longer attend the university. I spend most of my days in the scribe's folly, stacking books, watching the new, ambitious students come and go. Sometimes I see one of them pick up that untitled, leather-bound book. I try to warn them, just as Mr. Abernathy warned me. "Some doors are best left unopened," I say. Most of them ignore me. They have the same hunger in their eyes that I once had. They go down into that underground market to trade pieces of their soul, never understanding what they are truly losing until it is too late. I pray for them, and I wait. I wait in the hope that one day someone will come to the market selling love for a stranger or grief for a lost memory. Maybe, just maybe, I can buy back the pieces of myself one by one. Until then, I am here among the books and the ghosts, a living testament to the truth that everything has a price, especially the things that seem free. And beneath the streets of Eugene, the market is always open, waiting for the next soul willing to trade itself away. My name is Elena Vasquez. I am a structural engineer. I have spent my life understanding the tensile strength of steel, the compression limits of concrete, and the unwavering laws of physics. To me, the world is measurable, predictable. Bridges aren't just structures of metal and stone, they are beautiful monuments to mathematical certainty. I never imagined I would one day face a bridge that broke all those laws, a bridge that was alive. It began with the St. John's Bridge in Portland. The bridge is more than a crossing, it's an icon. Its 400-foot-tall Gothic towers, painted a delicate verdigris green, rise over the Willamette River like a cathedral. When it was completed in 1931, it was the longest suspension bridge west of the Mississippi. It's a masterpiece of engineering, a beauty I have always admired. My firm was contracted to perform the bridge's annual structural integrity report. It was a routine job, but one I was always excited to work on. It felt like examining a legend. This year, during the inspection, we started noticing oddities. A minor surface crack we had logged in the previous year's inspection was gone, not filled. It simply wasn't there, as if it had never existed. We dismissed it as a recording error. Then a member of my team, Dave, reported a lack of corrosion on a section of the North Tower that was perpetually plagued by moisture. "It's weird," he said, tapping the pristine steel. "Last year we scraped a significant amount of rust off this joint. Now it looks brand new." As the weeks went on, the list of anomalies grew. Minor damages that were part of normal wear and tear were healing themselves. Steel joints that had shown signs of fatigue now seemed to have the resilience of freshly forged metal. The bridge was regenerating. As an engineer, this was impossible. Metal does not heal. Concrete does not spontaneously fuse. We recalibrated our instruments, rechecked our data, but the results were the same. The bridge was growing younger, not older. I became obsessed with the mystery. I spent my nights poring over the bridge's original blueprints and construction logs. I started digging into the history of the land upon which it stood. The bridge was built on the edge of Forest Park, one of the largest urban forests in the country. Before its construction, the site was an ancient grove of old-growth Douglas firs. The land was sacred to the local Chinook tribes. They called it the place where the earth breathes. Deep in the archives, I found a few forgotten diaries from the construction workers. They were filled with strange accounts. Workers complained of tools disappearing at night, only to be found in the morning woven into the branches of trees. They reported hearing strange music and whispers from the forest, even when no one was there. One entry, written by a foreman in 1930, sent a shiver down my spine. "We took down the last of the big ones today. A giant must have been 1,000 years old. When it fell, there was a silence in the forest like I've never felt. It wasn't the silence of death. It was the silence of waiting, like the woods were holding their breath. I feel like we've done something wrong here. We didn't just cut down a tree, we cut out the heart of something living." Could it be possible? Could a bridge absorb the spirit of a forest? The idea was ludicrous to my logical mind, but I had no other explanation. I decided to install a network of advanced sensors on the bridge, not just to measure stress and strain, but for biometric readings. I used instruments normally reserved for geological surveys, capable of detecting low-frequency energy and organic resonance. The results confirmed my impossible theory. The bridge was emitting a faint, steady pulse of energy, a resonance that mimicked a living organism. It was like a heartbeat, slow and deep. It was strongest at night when traffic was sparse. I detected micro-vibrations that followed a complex branching pattern like a vascular system. The bridge was alive, but its ability to heal had to come at a cost. The first law of thermodynamics states that energy cannot be created or destroyed. If the bridge was repairing itself, it had to be drawing that energy from somewhere. The thought landed in my mind with a cold, dreadful certainty. Where was the bridge getting its energy? I focused my analysis on the flow of traffic. Every day, tens of thousands of cars crossed the bridge. I set up an experiment to analyze the people, not the vehicles. I enlisted volunteers whose biometric data, heart rate, body temperature, and subtle bioelectric fields, was measured before and after they crossed the bridge. The pattern was clear and horrifying. Every single person who crossed the bridge experienced a small, almost imperceptible drop in their vital energy. It wasn't much, perhaps the equivalent of the energy gained from drinking a tenth of a cup of coffee. It was so minor that no one would ever consciously notice it. But it was real. The bridge was feeding. It was siphoning a tiny spark of life from every person who passed over it. It was a giant, beautiful parasite. It provided the city with a vital artery, and in return, it was quietly sustaining itself on the life force of the city's inhabitants. It was a terrifying symbiosis. I presented my findings to the senior partners at my firm. They were skeptical at first, but as I showed them the data, the heartbeat, the energy flows, the effect on people, their faces grew pale. "What do we do?" my boss, Mr. Harris, asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Do we close the bridge? Do we tell the public that the city's most beloved landmark is a vampire?" We knew it was impossible. It would cause mass panic. The city's economy would be crippled. "Maybe it's not so bad," one partner argued, his voice strained. "The amount of energy it takes is minuscule. People don't even feel it. And in return, we get a bridge that could last forever, a bridge that never needs repairs." It was a monstrous logic, but it had a certain weight. Was the small daily price paid by thousands an acceptable trade for an immortal bridge? I couldn't agree. I wondered about the long-term effects. Did this tiny daily drain have a cumulative impact over years? Was it shortening lifespans or dulling happiness so slowly that no one would ever notice? I continued to study the bridge, trying to understand its behavior. I noticed its energy consumption wasn't always consistent. When the bridge sustained more significant damage, after a minor earthquake or a severe storm, its hunger increased. On those days, people reported feeling more tired, more inexplicably sad after their commute. The most horrifying discovery came after a suicide. A man jumped from the bridge. It was a tragic but unfortunately not uncommon event. But my sensors recorded something extraordinary at that moment. The instant the man hit the water, the bridge absorbed a massive surge of energy. It was as if it had drunk his entire life force in one gulp. For the next 24 hours, the bridge's regenerative abilities increased tenfold. The green of its Gothic towers seemed brighter, more vibrant. The bridge wasn't just sipping energy. It thrived on intense emotion, on despair, on pain, on death. I decided I had to do something. I couldn't stand by and watch this entity quietly feed on my city. I reached out to the elders of the local Chinook tribes. I met with an elder woman named Tahla. Her eyes were as old and deep as the forest I had come to ask about. I told her about my findings. She was not surprised. "We have always known the bridge is alive," she said, her voice calm. "When they cut the heart of the forest, its spirit had to find a new vessel. It flowed into the steel which was taken from the bones of the earth. It made a new body for itself." "Can it be stopped?" I asked. Tala shook her head. "It cannot be killed, for it is not truly alive in the way we are. It is an echo, a memory. But it can be soothed. It can be reminded of what it once was." She told me of an ancient ritual, a ceremony to honor the spirit of the forest. It involved song, herbs, and most importantly, a gift. not a gift of destruction but of creation. Following her advice, I devised a plan. I proposed an art installation be added to the bridge's structure. I convinced the city to install planter boxes along the pedestrian walkways for native plants and flowers. Officially, it was a civic beautification project, but secretly I used soil and seeds brought directly from the heart of Forest Park. Working with Tala and her people, we planted sacred herbs among the native flora. The night we installed the final planter, we held a quiet ceremony on the bridge. Tala sang in the old Chinook language, her voice weaving through the steel towers. The scent of sage and cedar filled the air. As she sang, my sensors detected a change within the bridge. Its heartbeat slowed, becoming more peaceful. Its energy field stabilized, no longer pulling outward. The plants began to take root in the bridge's structure. Their roots wrapped around the steel, embracing it. The bridge began to draw energy from them, from the life force of the plants, the soil, the sunlight. It stopped feeding on people. The St. John's Bridge is still alive, but it is no longer a parasite. It has become a garden, a symbiotic fusion of steel and leaf. It still heals itself, but now it draws its strength from the earth, not from the people who cross it. I still perform its annual inspection. I still listen to its slow, steady heartbeat. Sometimes when I'm alone on the bridge at night, I think I can hear whispers in the steel, not of the wind, but of the forest spirit at peace in its new, beautiful body. The city has no idea how close it came to a horrifying truth. They only see that their beloved bridge looks more beautiful than ever, with vines creeping up its green towers and wildflowers blooming along its walkways. They call it a triumph of urban planning. But I know the truth. I know it is a truce made with an ancient entity, a reminder that we cannot conquer nature. We can only hope to live in harmony with it. Because when we build, we don't just build on the land, we build on what came before. And sometimes what came before remains. My name is Dr. Alistair Alec Hughes. I'm a glaciologist. I've spent my life studying ice, the kind that carves mountains, reshapes landscapes, and holds the ancient history of our planet locked deep within its frozen heart. I always saw ice as a passive, albeit powerful force. I was wrong. What I learned on Mount Rainier shattered my science, my beliefs, and my very perception of reality. Mount Rainier, or Tahoma as the local tribes call it, isn't just a mountain. It's a deity, a dormant volcano that looms over the Seattle skyline with a majestic, terrifying presence. Its 25 major glaciers hold more ice than any other peak in the contiguous United States. I was there to study the Carbon Glacier, the largest by volume and the lowest elevation glacier in the nation. My mission was standard scientific procedure. Study the glacier's ablation rate and take ice core samples to extract ancient atmospheric data. It was a routine expedition, or so I thought. The first oddity occurred while we were setting up base camp. Our instruments were giving strange readings. The ground-penetrating radar, GPR, detected a massive, hollow anomaly deep within the glacier, a cavern nearly 500 feet down that shouldn't have been there. Geologically, it made no sense. But the most unsettling thing was the sound we heard at night. It wasn't the wind. It was a deep, resonant, melodic hum that seemed to emanate from the ice itself, like a colossal creature breathing in its sleep. Other climbers dismissed it as the song of the glacier, the sound of meltwater flowing and ice shifting. But I knew it was something else. There was a cadence to it, an intelligence. 2 weeks into the expedition, while we were working higher up on the glacier, an unforecasted blizzard descended upon us. The weather reports had been crystal clear, but within minutes the sky turned black and the wind began to scream. This was no ordinary storm. The snowflakes had a strange crystalline glitter, and the air held an unnatural cold that seeped into your bones. We took shelter in our tents, waiting for the storm to pass. That's when I saw it for the first time. Through the fabric of the tent, I saw a silhouette outside. It was humanoid, but impossibly tall and slender, as if sculpted from ice and shadow. It stood there for a moment, a silent observer in the maelstrom, and then vanished into the swirling snow. When the storm cleared, 2 members of our team, Jake and Maya, were gone. Their tent was slashed open, but there were no signs of a struggle. Their gear was all in place. They had simply vanished. The park rangers launched a search and rescue operation, but they found nothing. Officially, they were presumed dead, lost in a crevasse or having wandered off in the blizzard. But I knew that wasn't the truth. I had seen the silhouette. I was shaken, but I continued my work, now with a new, grim urgency. I focused on the subterranean cavern our radar had detected. I decided to drill down to it using a robotic drill and camera system. After days of careful drilling, we broke through. As the camera feed flickered to life on my screen, my breath caught in my throat. This was no natural ice cave. The walls were smooth and carved as if by intelligent hands. An ethereal blue light emanated from the ceiling, filtered through the immense weight of the ice above. And in the center of the cavern was a collection. They were statues. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of human figures encased in translucent blue ice. They were frozen in various poses, some screaming in terror, others looking up in wonder, a few appearing peaceful. They wore climbing gear from different eras, some modern, some decades old, and a few looked like they were from the 19th century. I zoomed in on one of the figures. The face was perfectly preserved through the ice. It was Jake. His eyes were wide open, frozen in a rictus of fear, a silent scream on his lips. The figure next to him was Maya. They weren't dead. My biosensors attached to the camera were picking up faint but steady life signs. Their bodies were in a state of cryostasis, their metabolism slowed to a near standstill, but they were alive. They were imprisoned. I recoiled in horror. This wasn't a graveyard, it was a gallery. At that moment, something in the cavern moved. From the corner of the camera's view, a figure emerged. It was the same creature I had seen in the storm. It was tall and elegant, made of shimmering ice and deep shadow. It had no discernible face, but I felt it looking at me through the lens of the camera. It raised a hand made of crystalline shards and touched the camera. My screen dissolved into static and then went dark. I knew the truth now. An ancient entity lived within the glacier, an ice collector. It didn't kill climbers. It preserved them, adding them to its timeless gallery. The blizzards were its hunting net. I tried to report my findings to the authorities, but they dismissed me. I was in shock, they said, hallucinating from the trauma. They pulled me off the mountain and canceled my project, but I couldn't let it go. Jake and Maya were still up there, alive but entombed. I spent the next few months buried in research, digging into the folklore of the local tribes. I found tales of the cold soul of Tahoma, a spirit that lived in the mountain's ice, a lonely guardian that would call the warm-blooded ones to join it in its cold, silent world. One legend said the creature could only be repelled by the fire from the mountain's heart. I understood what it meant. Mount Rainier is an active volcano. Beneath the ice, it is alive and hot. I formed a desperate plan. I would return to the mountain alone, not to the glacier, but to the geothermal vents, the places where the volcano's heat escapes to the surface. I set out at night, avoiding the park rangers. It was a grueling climb, but I was driven by a singular purpose. I found a vent near the edge of the Carbon Glacier, where the heat had melted a deep, steaming tunnel into the ice. I entered the vapor-filled tunnel carrying a powerful signal transmitter. My plan was insane. I would lure the ice collector to me, draw it out of its frozen sanctum and into the volcano's heat. I activated the transmitter, which emitted a signal that mimicked the biosignatures of a human being. Then, I waited. Hours passed. Nothing. I began to think I was wrong. Then I felt it. A sudden, precipitous drop in temperature. The steam began to freeze. Frost crystals formed on the tunnel walls. It was coming. At the mouth of the tunnel, a figure appeared. It was the ice collector. It hesitated in the geothermal heat, but the lure of my transmitter was too strong. It glided toward me, its form shimmering and warping in the hot air. I could feel its power, a cold that wasn't just temperature, but an absence of life. It reached out its hand, ready to take me, to add me to its collection. The moment it stepped into the hottest part of the tunnel, it shrieked. It was the sound of 1,000 icicles shattering at once. The volcanic heat was unmaking its frozen body. It began to dissolve, turning into a cloud of steam and cold light. It looked at me one last time, and in its featureless void, I sensed a look of surprise and perhaps gratitude, as if I had released it from a long, lonely vigil. Then it was gone. I don't know if I killed it or merely banished it, but when I came down from the mountain, something had changed. Other teams on the glacier reported that the strange humming had stopped. The sudden, unforecasted storms ceased. And the strangest thing of all, at the terminus of the Carbon Glacier, dozens of people were found wandering in the icefall, disoriented and hypothermic. They were the climbers who had gone missing over the years, even decades. They were all alive, with no memory of what had happened to them. To them, only a moment had passed. Jake and Maya were among them. Officially, the event was attributed to an unknown natural phenomenon, a release of subterranean gases, perhaps, that induced a state of suspended animation. But I know the truth. I don't study glaciers anymore. I stay away from the mountains, but sometimes when I look out from Seattle and see the snow-capped peak of Mount Rainier, I wonder if the ice collector is still there, deep in the ice, waiting, reforming. And I think of the faces I saw in its frozen gallery. Not all of them were freed, only those who had vanished in the last 50 years or so returned. The older ones, they had likely become part of the glacier itself, their life force forever woven into the ice. The mountain keeps its secrets, and some secrets remain imprisoned in the ice, waiting for the day the glacier decides to start its collection once more. And when that day comes, who will be there to stop it? My name is Samuel Jones. I've been a park ranger for 15 years. I've spent the best days of my life in the vast, wild beauty of Olympic National Park. I've climbed its snow-capped peaks, weathered storms on its rugged coast, and walked the moss-draped emerald corridors of the Hoh rainforest more times than I can count. I thought I knew this forest. I was familiar with its every sound, every whisper, every silence. But I was wrong. There is a silence no human can comprehend, and within that silence, something hunts. It all started during a routine patrol. I was dispatched to investigate reports of missing hikers in a remote section of the Hoh rainforest known colloquially as the Valley of Stillness. The name came from an old unofficial bit of folklore. The stories said there was a place in the valley where all sound simply died. I'd always dismissed the tales as just that, stories. An exaggeration of the forest's natural acoustics. The Hoh rainforest, with its dense canopy and thick carpets of moss, is a natural sound absorber. There's even a real designated spot called 1 square inch of silence, one of the quietest places in the United States. I assumed the legends were an outgrowth of that phenomenon. As I hiked into the valley, I felt the change. It wasn't gradual, it was like a switch had been flipped. One moment I could hear the chatter of birds, the rustle of wind through the giant Sitka spruce, and the distant murmur of a creek. The next, everything was gone. It wasn't just quiet, it was a total absence of sound. I tried to hear my own footsteps, but my boots fell on the soft, mossy earth without a whisper. I coughed. I felt the physical rattle in my throat, but no sound emerged. I tried to shout, feeling the pressure build in my lungs, but the result was a voiceless, empty strain. The experience was profoundly disorienting. We take sound for granted until it's gone. In this vacuum, the world felt unreal, as if I were moving through a thick, soundless medium. The beat of my own heart was a dull thud I could feel in my chest, but not here. I tried my radio. Static filled the screen, but it was a silent static, a visual snowstorm with no audible crackle or hiss. I was completely, utterly cut off. Relying on my training, I pushed forward. The missing hikers, a young couple, had been gone for 3 days. Their last known heading was toward this valley. As I went deeper, the silence became more oppressive. It felt like a physical pressure against my eardrums. I grew dizzy, my senses so accustomed to relying on auditory cues now thrown into confusion. Then I saw them. They were sitting on the side of the trail beneath a giant moss-laden maple, holding each other. They were perfectly still. "Hello?" I mouthed, raising a hand. They didn't move. As I drew closer, I saw that their eyes were wide open, glazed with a terror so profound it seemed to have frozen them solid. Their faces were locked in a silent scream. Their bodies were cold and rigid. There were no marks of violence, no wounds. They looked as if they had simply died of fright where they sat. I examined the area around them. I found no animal tracks, no signs of a struggle. But I did find one thing. On the ground, pressed into the moss around them, were strange patterns. They weren't footprints. They were a series of fine, undulating lines, like someone had drawn sound waves in the mud. I made the decision to leave the bodies and head back for help. But as I turned, I felt it, a presence. The forest was watching me. I saw a flicker of movement between the trees. It wasn't an animal, it was a shimmer, a distortion in the air like a heat haze, but it was cold and dark. It moved without a sound, flowing between the trees, a silent, predatory ripple. I ran for my life, but there was no sound of my flight, only the burning in my lungs and the ache in my legs. I kept glancing back, and each time the distortion was closer. I don't know how long I ran. Eventually, I stumbled and fell at the edge of the valley. The moment I crossed the boundary of the silent zone, sound rushed back in a deafening roar. The birds, the wind, my own ragged gasps for air. It all hit me at once, and it was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. I looked back. The distortion had stopped at the edge of the valley, as if it could not leave its silent domain. For a moment, I thought I saw it take a shape, a tall, thin creature with too many limbs and no face, and then it dissolved back into the deep woods. I made it back to headquarters and filed my report. I told them everything, the silence, the bodies, the creature. My supervisor, an old-timer ranger named Hank, listened patiently. When I finished, he sighed heavily and unlocked a drawer in his desk. He pulled out a thick, worn file labeled Anomalous Occurrences, Valley of Stillness. The file was filled with reports spanning 70 years. Dozens of rangers and hikers had described similar experiences. The sudden cessation of sound, the discovery of animals or people dead from apparent fright, and the sighting of an indescribable, shimmering entity. "We don't know what it is," Hank said, his voice low. "The local tribes have stories about a mute god, a spirit that hates sound and consumes it. They've always stayed away from that valley." Hank explained the prevailing theory among the few who knew. The creature was an acoustic predator. It creates a trap by nullifying sound. The silence is its weapon. When a living thing enters its domain, it becomes disoriented, terrified. The creature senses this fear. It feeds on it. "We don't think it kills directly," Hank said. "It just creates an environment where living things scare themselves to death. Their hearts literally give out from the stress of the sensory deprivation and the sheer wrongness of its presence. Officially, the valley was closed due to unstable geological activity. We couldn't tell the public the truth, but I wasn't satisfied. I had to know what this thing was. I spent the next few months obsessively researching the phenomenon. I contacted an acoustical physicist, Dr. Evelyn Reed, a brilliant but eccentric scientist known for her work on exotic sound properties. When I told her my story, she didn't think I was crazy. She was intrigued. She proposed a theory. What if the creature isn't nullifying sound but converting it, shifting it down to an infrasound frequency below the range of human hearing? A powerful enough infrasound resonance can induce feelings of intense fear, anxiety, and even cardiac arrest. The theory made a terrifying kind of sense. It would explain why there were no physical marks on the bodies. We devised a plan. We would go back into the valley, but this time, we would be prepared. We built specialized equipment, a sonic generator capable of emitting waves of varying frequencies and sensors that could detect anomalous acoustic energy. We entered the valley with a small, specialized team. The moment we crossed into the silent zone, the same dreadful, oppressive quiet fell over us. Our sensors immediately went wild. They were detecting an incredibly powerful infrasound frequency vibrating in the very air around us. We found the bodies of the couple where I had left them, but they were not alone now. Surrounding them were the corpses of dozens of forest animals, deer, bears, foxes, all frozen with the same look of ultimate terror. The creature had been hunting. Then we saw it. It emerged from between the trees, a shimmering, shadowy form. It was drawn to us, to the life and the fear we brought into its silent world. "Now!" Evelyn yelled, signaling with her hands. I activated the sonic generator. We started with a low, resonant frequency. The creature paused. It tilted its featureless head toward us as if listening. We slowly increased the frequency, sweeping up the scale. As we hit a certain pitch, a high, almost piercing note, the creature reacted. Its form shuddered and a silent scream seemed to emanate from it, a wave of pressure we felt in our bones. Its shape began to destabilize, its shadowy body breaking apart into motes of light and darkness. It was made of sound, and sound was unmaking it. We held the frequency steady. The creature recoiled, weakening, its form dissolving like smoke. Finally, with one last silent implosion, it vanished. In that instant, sound returned to the valley. It was a physical blow, the cacophony of birds, the rush of wind, the sound of our own breathing. The silence was broken. We don't know if we destroyed it for good or simply drove it away. But since that day, the Valley of Stillness is no longer still. The sound has returned, and with it, life. I'm still a ranger in Olympic National Park. I still patrol the Hoh rainforest. But I listen to silence differently now. I know that not all quiet is peaceful. Some quiet is hungry. And when I'm deep in the forest and the wind dies for a moment and the birds go quiet, I stop and I listen. I listen to make sure the silence is truly empty and not a void where something is hiding, waiting for the sound to die so it can begin its hunt. Because the forest keeps its secrets, and the deepest ones are the ones you cannot hear. My name is Caleb Hawkins. I've lived my whole life on the waters of the San Juan Islands. My father was a fisherman and his father before him. The sea is in my blood. I know its every tide, its every current, its every mood. I thought I knew its every secret, but some secrets are so deep and so dark they only reveal themselves in the fog. And when they do, they change you forever. There's an old story that circulates among the sailors in the San Juans. A tale whispered in taverns but never spoken of on the open water. It's the story of the ghost fleet. According to the legend, when the fog gets thick, so thick that the water and sky become one, You can sometimes see them, a flotilla of dozens of ships gliding silently over the water. This isn't a single ghost ship like the Flying Dutchman. This is an entire fleet. Old world square riggers, early steamships, fishing trawlers, even modern yachts, all of them decayed and broken, sailing together in an eerie, silent procession. Most people write it off as a yarn, a hallucination of tired sailors. I used to think so too, until I saw it with my own eyes. It was an evening in October. I was heading back to Friday Harbor on my boat, the Seawolf, tired but satisfied after a long day of crabbing. Suddenly, without warning, a dense white fog rolled in. It was San Juan fog, cold, damp, and so thick you could barely see your own hand in front of your face. I throttled down, relying on my radar and GPS, but my electronics were acting up. The radar screen became a chaotic mess of dozens of small blips surrounding me on all sides, though no other boats should have been in the channel. My GPS was on the fritz too, skipping my position around erratically. I cut the engine, letting the boat drift in the oppressive quiet, trying to trust my senses. And then, I heard it. It wasn't a single sound, it was a faint ghostly symphony, the groaning of splintered wood, the flapping of tattered sails, and the hollow slap of water against broken hulls. The sound was coming from all around me. My heart began to pound with a primal fear. I grabbed my powerful searchlight and swept its beam into the thick white wall of fog. At first I saw nothing. Then the beam caught a shape. It was the mast of an old square rigger, its sails hanging in rotted shreds. Its hull was caked in moss and seagrass. It drifted past me so close I could smell the decay of its ancient timbers. Then another vessel appeared, an early 20th century steamer, no smoke coming from its stack, its portholes staring like vacant eyes. It was followed by a fishing trawler much like my own, but its nets were torn and its cabin was a wreck of shattered glass and splintered wood. There were dozens of them. They were all around me, a silent, spectral armada, all moving in the same direction. They didn't collide. They seemed to pass through one another as if they weren't entirely solid. I was looking at the ghost fleet. I was frozen with a mixture of terror and a mariner's curiosity. What were they? Where were they going? I made a dangerous decision. I restarted my engine, the sound unnaturally loud in the dead air, and began to follow them, keeping what I hoped was a safe distance. As I trailed the fleet, I felt the air grow colder. A strange, ethereal blue light seemed to emanate from the ships, casting a pale glow on the water. I tried to radio for help, but all I got was static, and through the static I could hear faint whispers. The voices of the sailors who went down with these ships. I remembered the stories of a local historian, an old man named Sam. He had a theory, one most people dismissed as madness. He believed the ghost ships weren't hauntings in the traditional sense, but nautical scars. According to his theory, when a vessel sinks in the treacherous waters of the San Juans under violent or tragic circumstances, it leaves a scar on the memory of the sea itself. This scar, this spectral echo, remains. When the fog is thick enough, it thins the veil between our world and this sea of memory, allowing the scars to become visible. The fleet was the collection of every ship that had ever been lost here, all sailing together, reliving their final tragic voyage. Sam had also said something else, something more terrifying. He said that if a living vessel gets too close to the fleet, the collective energy of the spectral ships can pull it in. The living boat becomes a scar itself, its fate forever bound to the ghost fleet, its crew lost along with it. The thought had barely crossed my mind when the engine of the Seawolf sputtered, coughed, and died. I tried desperately to restart it, but it was no use. I was dead in the water, and the current was slowly, inexorably pushing me toward the ghost fleet. The ships were closer now, I could see details on their decks, broken railings, scattered equipment, and occasionally a translucent human shape standing at the helm, staring at me with empty eyes. A massive three-masted galleon was bearing down on me. The nameplate on its bow read, "The Leviathan." I recognized the name. It was a merchant ship that had vanished in a storm in 1898, with all hands lost. As the Leviathan approached, I felt an undeniable pull. My boat was being drawn toward it as if by a magnetic force. I knew that if it touched me, the Seawolf and I would become part of this phantom procession. In desperation, I grabbed my flare gun. I didn't aim it at the sky. I aimed it directly at the mainmast of Sturm the Leviathan. The flare shot through the fog, a streak of crimson, and struck the ghost ship. There was no explosion, but where the flare hit, a bright, burning light erupted. The spectral vessel shuddered, and a collective, agonized groan echoed, not in the air, but in my mind. It was the cry of all the souls bound to the fleet. The light acted like a shockwave, and the Leviathan recoiled. The pull was broken. But now the fleet had noticed me. All the ships as one began to turn toward me. They were no longer drifting aimlessly, they were hunting. I cranked the engine key frantically. Finally, with a sputter and a cloud of black smoke, it roared back to life. I threw the boat into a hard turn and gunned it, leaving the spectral armada behind. I didn't look back. I just focused on the speed of my boat, praying I could outrun them and find my way out of the fog. After what felt like hours, the fog began to thin. Soon I saw the welcoming lights of Friday Harbor. When I docked, I was shaking, but I was alive. The next day, I went to inspect my boat. On its port side, where the Leviathan had come closest, there was a cold, damp patch on the hull. And clinging to it was a strand of seaweed that looked and felt over a century old. I never sailed in the fog at night again. I told my story to a few of the other old-timers. They nodded, a knowing look in their eyes. They told me the fleet was real and that the only way to survive it was to respect it and stay away. They said using the flare gun was a dangerous gamble. I had provoked the fleet. I still live and fish in the San Juans. But now, I always keep one eye on the sky. When the fog rolls in, I stay in port. Sometimes when the fog is especially thick, I stand on the shore and look out at the water. And sometimes I think I can see them, a procession of shadows on the distant horizon gliding by in silence. And I think they can see me too. They are waiting, because I have seen their secret and I have defied them. One day I fear they will come to collect their due. They will come for the sea wolf. So if you are ever in the San Juan Islands and the fog rolls in, stay off the water. And if you hear the groaning of splintered wood or the flapping of tattered sails, pray they don't see you. Because the ghost fleet sails forever and it is always looking to add new ships to its procession. They are the scars of the sea that never heal, and they will not hesitate to make you a scar too.